This is episode 750 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. And I am very pleased to be joined this week by Jennifer Bradfute and Matthias Sayer. Both are with the WATR, WATR Alliance, and we're going to be talking about water, WATER, and water issues, as well as produced water and efforts in New Mexico underway on this particular issue. So welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, well, we haven't talked a ton about water over the span of 750 issues. It's issues of Tipping Point, New Mexico. Obviously, it's a huge issue here as we live in the desert Southwest, the high desert. But as they say, water is a very complicated issue with roots in terms of water rights going back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and there's a lot of basic economic issues that we talk about, but water obviously very incredibly important issue here. So why don't you just briefly describe, one of you, what the Water Alliance is and why this issue kind of has so-called bubbled to the surface these days. What is the critical nature of what's going on right now?
Yeah, and Paul, appreciate that question because we think that the background discussion about why we're having this conversation today is really important. I think we'll lead with something that most New Mexicans inherently appreciate, but maybe not, aren't familiar with the data associated with why they appreciate that, which is that over the next 50 years, New Mexico will experience a 25% reduction in its water supplies. You don't lose 25% of your water without losing something else, right? We will see reductions across the board in our economy, in what our communities are able to do and achieve, investment they're able to attract, whether or not, our children, I have 4 boys, will have opportunities to come home to, because we're losing 25% of our water.
Now, where is that 25% of our water going? Because obviously water is not created nor destroyed, but where's our water going?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a recent Supreme Court holding where Texas is going to get more of our water. I served on a 2022 task force that the governor put together on water and infrastructure, and ideas suggested during that task force from different kind of viewpoints were, let's stop allowing grass areas. Let's stop having city parks. Let's disallow the use of swimming pools within communities. And so there's only so many places communities can pull water out of proactively, and they call those conservation efforts. The governor has then shifted, and she's wanted to focus a little bit more on water augmentation. Mm-hmm. And so that is the question. How do you augment your water to offset that 25% loss?
Now, let's be real. Statistically speaking, water in New Mexico is overwhelmingly dedicated to agriculture. And we love our friends in ag. We understand that they do a lot for the economy of the state. That doesn't mean that necessarily every single use of those scarce water rights are the way it should be done. And there's a lot of market systems within water. It's one of the reasons we don't touch water, because there's not really a market for water in the same way that there are markets for so many other basic things that humanity requires. But obviously eliminating, golf courses, that's one dear to my heart. We don't want to get rid of those, but a lot of those uses that you're talking about are pretty critical to, I think, most people's vision of a good quality life, even here in the desert Southwest. So, I don't want to get down the path too far on this, but there's obviously a lot of debate and discussion around how we use water in New Mexico. I assume that is part of the equation, not just, in this case, finding new supplies to put to work in water.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got kind of different camps of water advocates. Certain camps focus on conservation. The Water Alliance, the Water Access Treatment and Reuse Alliance, we are passionate about fueling a water treatment and reuse industry, whether it's treating municipal wastewater so that you can use that. Most cities upstream of us that are north of us in different states reuse their water approximately 4 times, and it goes back into the river systems 4 times before it comes downstream to New Mexico. Other areas of water treatment that we're really passionate about is brackish desalination, and then the treatment of produced water, where the state could gain up to 300 acre feet a year of water resources.
Okay. 300, no offense, but 300 acre feet. You might as well talk about parsecs and light years because I don't know what the heck that means. Can you explain to the average person what 300 acre feet looks like or how that would fit into our water usage as a state?
Yeah, we can contextualize that a little bit. And it's so right now in New Mexico, just give a little more background on that number, we generate approximately 2.5 billion barrels of produced water a year on the New Mexico side across New Mexico from the oil and gas production. 98% of that is in the Permian Basin, so in Lee and Eddy counties. So the figure Jennifer mentioned is, just converting that number barrels to acre feet. So we're looking at about 300,000 acre feet of water. And to put that into context, Albuquerque, Bernalillo County uses approximately 100,000 acre feet a year total water consumption. So
And by consumption, you mean like
usage.
actual stuff that goes onto the ground or is not dumped down the drain that winds up at the water treatment facility. So this is water that wherever it goes, we don't know, evaporation,
Yeah.
Your garden, presumably, and those juicy tomatoes that kind of don't really get returned to the system, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think, one other just thought on that, you asked, where is this water going that we're losing? We get water from two sources in New Mexico, right? It's groundwater and surface water. And so many of our aquifers, especially when you look at those eastern New Mexican aquifers, they've seen continual decline in the level of that aquifer. So they're having to extend wells deeper and deeper and deeper to access that water.
And out east, you're talking about the Ogallala Aquifer, kind of the
Correct.
western edge of that, which is,
Correct.
I know it's the biggest in the North American continent. I don't know if it's the biggest around the world or not, but it's a very significant underground reservoir of water.
Correct. And for better, for worse, and somewhat fortuitously, and in some ways, a great blessing for Lee and Eddy County, who are on top of that part of of parts of that aquifer, where they're losing water. Produced water is right there, right? So they have this real problem with their water levels receding in the aquifer, but then they've got this opportunity with this water right now, 300,000 acre feet a year that we're sending to Texas or putting down into a deep disposal well, which could be reused if science says we can do this in ways that are protective of human health and the environment.
Yeah, so let's get right into it because, you see the pump jack operating above ground. You see some level of infrastructure relating to oil and gas, and you think, well, there's some oil and some other associated stuff coming out of the ground in that, but it is not something until you really get in a little deeper to the oil and gas and the way it actually works that you realize there's actually a lot of water that comes up. So one of you can describe what that means, and it's always been the case, but because New Mexico's seen such an unprecedented boom in oil and gas production, we're seeing a boom in produced water production. So what is this water, and what could we realistically do with it?
Yeah. So back in prehistoric times, New Mexico was probably covered with an ocean. All of the decomposing ocean life, all the plant life became oil. And the Permian Basin is a world-class oil basin. And so we probably had a lot of great ocean life covering New Mexico as it decomposed and sediments settled on top of it. The oil got trapped in geologic formations, but so did the ancient seawater. And so a lot of our geologic formations, thousands of feet below the earth, have a lot of water molecules hanging out between the rock sediment. And whenever you go in and you drill an oil well in a shale formation and you start to put fractures into the rock formation, you're going to get out the hydrocarbons, you're going to get out the liquid oil, but along with it is going to come that ancient seawater. And so that really is what produced water is. It's ancient seawater sitting within the rock formation.
Yeah, well, I can recommend a exhibit at the Natural History Museum right down next to Old Town, where you can see that history. And of course, you can go for a hike at the top of the Sandias and see seashells in the rocks up there, and you wonder how the heck did seashells get to the top of this mountain? Well, it's exactly the phenomenon you're talking about. So I've definitely studied the ancient history of New Mexico, and it's once upon a time being covered with water. So you may actually be drinking water that was once in the bladder of a Tyrannosaurus Rex or something. So moving on. So you got all this water coming out of the ground, and we've got more water than ever. Now this isn't, you don't want to drink this stuff, at least not right away when it comes up out of the ground. And you mentioned that today the most common practice is to inject it underground, and there's questions about causing earthquakes, at least in Oklahoma City. I don't think we've had anything like that here, or not Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, but we haven't had anything like that here in New Mexico. But this is obviously a potential resource for us here. The process I know is desalinization, where you essentially take the salt out of the water. Now, salt and water, it's pretty easy. I mean, you just got to figure out a way to capture the water and leave the salt behind. This seems a lot more complicated, but per our conversations, you've indicated that it is realistic to make this water usable, and that it won't do any harm to wildlife or kill people. So talk about just top level 50,000 foot stuff. What is that process like, and what can we realistically do with this water?
Yeah, and that's I think a really important question. As the Water Alliance has worked to advocate for this particular non-traditional water resource, that's a question that a lot of folks have. And I don't think it's unique to a conversation about produced water. Generally folks are, and rightfully should be, curious about their water quality. And so in the context of produced water, this isn't an effort that sprung up this year or last year. This has been, a long time in the making. In the late 2010s, as New Mexico was starting to see some regulatory influx of applications to manage this water at the Oil Conservation Division, we saw this wall of water coming into the state, and we simultaneously saw issues of water scarcity. So we started back then saying, what are the regulatory policy and technical gaps we need to fill if we want to do something with this water other than throw it away. And so, regulatory and policy gaps were identified. So many of them were filled, but then there was these technical gaps. What's in the water? We need to characterize this water and understand what's in that before we can decide to do something with it. And so in 2019, the Produced Water Research Consortium was stood up at New Mexico State University. The Environment Department and NMSU worked together to stand this up, and other stakeholders who saw value in pursuing research in this space joined and participated. And so for the last 6-7 years, that entity has been aggressively moving forward on both characterizing this water, testing and piloting treatment trains, different approaches to treatment, all with an eye towards, can we produce an effluent that is of high enough quality that we can use it for something besides just throwing it away. And so the point we've gotten to today is there are multiple, there are various technologies that are employed together in a treatment train, to produce, a clean distillate. And one of those is what you mentioned. It's a desal step, and there's different methods of desalination. Some of them are thermal processes where you're either you're heating the water to separate the salts out. Another technology has been piloted and had great results. It was actually a freeze thaw train where they were freezing the water to a certain freezing point where they would separate the salt out. So both of those you can consider as thermal, using temperature to treat the water. But then once you've separated the salts out and the solids out, then you look at advanced treatment technologies that are using membranes, microbes to filter out organics, inorganics, and then a final, or just use the word that the people who are trying to simplify it use, a polishing step, where you polish out, that last step, any of these residual constituents that we don't want in the water.
Is the water radioactive? I've heard that or read that from some of the opponents of this.
There is naturally occurring radioactive materials that come up with the oil production. They are usually entrenched with the solids, so the salt. And so your norm gets knocked out in the desalination phase of the water treatment. So typically you've got at least 3 to 4 parts of your treatment train. You're going to have pre-treatment, which is taking out your oil in the water and then any chemicals that were used in the oil and gas completions process. Desalination is going to knock out your solids, including your norm. And then you're going to go through a second part of your treatment train, usually that is involved in the desalination phase, removing other constituents. And then you go into the polishing phase, where you've got things like activated carbon and things like that get the water really clean. A lot of the treatment technology in the polishing phase is also used in municipal treatment systems and other water treatment systems that we're aware of.
Okay, so is this water going to be drinkable when it's done? If not, why not? And if it's not drinkable, why? I mean, why should we be putting it out into? Because obviously, I mentioned jokingly Tyrannosaurus urine at some point in the past. I mean, water is kind of one of those things that it's neither created nor destroyed, kind of like energy. So ultimately, if this water is put into circulation on the surface of the planet, it's going to wind up coming down in rain and being a part of the water we use and drink and et cetera. So
yeah, it is going to be drinkable. So the water quality is great of the water. The treatment trains bring the water to a distilled water quality. So if you go down the grocery store aisle and you look at this distilled water jugs, they will tell you don't drink those because it doesn't have the minerals for your gut, right? But there's nothing toxic about distilled water. Then the water is going to have to be remineralized for other types of uses. So if you want to use it to grow cotton or alfalfa, you need to have minerals for the soil health. And so you got to re-add the minerals back into the water, because it's going to take a while to build public trust in any type of water treatment. It takes a while to build public trust in the quality of the water. We are not starting out asking for this to go in drinking water systems. We're asking for it to go into non-potable uses. And then I think as the water is used over time, the public will begin to trust the water treatment process, but it does come out at a very high quality.
Okay. So this sounds like an incredible win-win here. Not always possible. I want to talk, of course, about the politics of this kind of thing, because that's why you're ultimately here, because there's a lot of political resistance to this kind of thing. But before we get into the resistance, so to speak, Governor Lujan Grisham, who is somebody we tend to not agree with very often, she's at least rather supportive of this general concept. So kind of talk about her role and, more broadly speaking, some of the political actors, and you can talk about the upcoming meeting and just kind of what does the debate and discussion look like on this issue?
Yeah, and I think in the context of the governor and some of her thought leaders, they were very clear in the governor's strategic water supply. And Jennifer referenced this earlier in terms of trying to find new water supplies. The specifically in the strategic water supply work product, the governor's team identified treated produced water and brackish water as sources that we need to be pursuing, both on the technological side and on the regulatory side. And that is what we've seen from the governor and her team on this issue, is a commitment to advancing efforts to leverage these water resources. And some of the efforts that we've seen included legislation in 2024. The strategic water supply was introduced to the legislature, where the governor's team was requesting funding to the tune of $500 million to help advance both the treated produced water and brackish water. That did not succeed. So they brought it back in the 2025 first session, where that bill ended up passing, and it advanced $40 million towards brackish water development. And in the context of produced water, what we've seen is in 2019 legislation that clarified some of those gaps that I mentioned before. It established ownership of produced water, who has that possessory interest sufficient to be able to transact with the water, and that is the producer. It spoke to regulations, and that 2019 legislation said the Environment Department shall adopt regulations regulating the discharge, reuse, transportation, use, etc. of produced water. And what we don't have to date is a regulation that does that. In terms of some of the politics we're seeing and experiencing right now related to this issue, the Environment Department brought a phase one rulemaking in 2023, which at the outset, the intent of that regulation was to establish a baseline which prohibited the reuse of treated produced water until we had standards that we could base permits on. So that was the rule that they brought. It turned into a bit of a debate about, are we going to discharge? Are we not going to discharge? The Environment Department was never really trying to bring a case about, yes, we're trying to pass a discharge rule. No, that was always phase two of their regulatory approach. So phase one passed, and generally the rule said as much, like the discharge of produced water, reuse of produced water is prohibited until, again, we have a permitting scheme. So we brought this rule in May, petitioned the Water Quality Control Commission, and the rule is a comprehensive permitting rule that would facilitate the reuse of treated produced water, in various spaces, but not in potable spaces. And what we've been met with is a lot of opposition to the concept. Our argument through this is it's showing up in the form of a petition asking the commission to look at the latest science, because we're using the latest, the most advanced thinking research on this, which shows you can do this in ways that are protective of human health and the environment. Texas is doing it. They're moving forward with permits. So we are confident, based on conversations with experts, that this can be done. The folks who are opposed to this, who are primarily based in Santa Fe, are very anti-oil and gas. And so their argument is really, we don't want to see the science. We want to wait 5 years, and we'll take a look at this again in 5 years when this phase one rulemaking sunsets. But until then, we don't want to hear about the science. You had your chance with the science in that last rulemaking, so go away. And we don't want to talk about this until 2030.
All right. So we can get into some of the issues there, but there is a deliverable or request for our listeners and viewers that you guys have. Can you talk about what that is and what you're asking people to do right now who might support the expansion of New Mexico's water supplies?
Yeah. So we see a lot of New Mexicans rallying around the fact that we are seeing drought. The Rio Grande River ran dry this summer. Right. And we want New Mexicans to support looking at the science and looking at whether or not produced water is a good way to supplement our water supply. And what we're asking is that you contact the Water Quality Control Commission. There is a hearing on October 14th at 9 a.m. in Santa Fe at the Roundhouse where people can give public comment and say, we want to hear this rulemaking. We want to hear the science. We want to hear the evidence. We expect to see a lot of activists in the room. A lot of them are funded by out-of-state interests. We've got a group of activists at Balloon Fiesta this year coming in from New York City, trying to dictate New Mexico's future water supplies. And New Mexicans need to get serious about this. The other thing that we're seeing is Santa Fe activist groups wanting to decide water quality decisions for the southeastern part of the state and the northern part of the state. Santa Fe's not going to get produced water. It'll never flow up there for their uses. This rulemaking's limited to 13 counties, all outlining the southern part of the state and the northern part of the state. But Santa Fe wants to control whether or not they can have access to the water in those parts of the state.
Now, by Santa Fe, just to put a little bit of a finer point on it, obviously it is a left-wing liberal hotbed, yes, but you're also referring to a large number of very well-funded environmental groups from across the country who engage in politics and are able to gin up folks in the environmental community on these issues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And they're fundraising on this. I mean, one of the groups has $30 million reported as their income from 2022, 2023. They employ 200 people across the United States. 40 of them are lawyers. Very few of them live in New Mexico.
Yeah, and the size and scope of these organizations, set aside Rio Grande Foundation, which our budget's in the hundreds of thousands, not in the millions. These organizations, these radical environmental groups, dwarf groups like the Heritage Foundation, Cato Institute, and other organizations, setting aside the fact that Heritage and Cato work on a wide array of issues from free trade to defense policy to et cetera. These environmental groups are focused generally on relatively narrow issues and have tremendous power to throw money and personnel at them. So why would so-called environmentalists be opposed to more water coming available here in New Mexico? These are some of the first people who say we can't have development, private, homes or businesses, because we don't have enough water here in New Mexico. You hear that quite constantly from, I'm sure, very many of these same people. And yet, when an opportunity comes to leverage more water that's not being utilized right now, they oppose it. What do you think that reasoning looks like?
Yeah, and I think one thing that we hear a lot from folks who are, vigorously opposing this is, agua es vida, water is life.
Right.
That's our line. Honestly, that's our line, because we don't have more water coming into the state, and so we need more water. And so when you start to really try and have a conversation with some of these folks, I think the opposition falls into two categories. One of them makes complete sense. I'm concerned about my water quality. I've heard what happened in Flint, Michigan. I see municipalities around the state that are struggling with water quality. I hear about PFAS contamination. I'm worried. So this concerns me, and that's a legitimate concern, and that's a concern we want to talk about all day long, because there's science that we've incorporated into this rule that answers that and says, here are the multi-barriers of protection that we've incorporated into the rule to make sure that the effluent, that the distillate that's coming out of this treatment train is of a high quality. So we want to have a conversation about that. The other category of opposition, though, is experiencing some cognitive dissonance, because they're saying water is life, while simultaneously saying we don't want to explore, we don't want to hear about, we don't want to talk about the science related to this water. Why? Because we hate oil and gas, right? So that's why that's what we think, and that's what we've seen and experienced from so many of these groups in Santa Fe is, we're not going to read the second sentence. We saw the first that said this is related to oil and gas, and so we are opposed to it. And that's so much of what we're experiencing right now. And when we went around the state the last 2 weeks, held some town hall events in Farmington, in Las Cruces, in Socorro, and in Hobbs. And what we saw when we were in Farmington, we had 35 to 40 folks from the community show up, many of them students, who asked good questions related to water quality, wanting that question answered. When we were in Socorro and in Las Cruces, we had 5 or 6 people. When we were in Hobbs, we had 30 to 40 people show up, asking those same questions about water quality, and then asking, understanding that this rule is protective of that, how do we get involved? Because we want to use this. We want to leverage this resource if the science is solid.
Well, we all know that this water shortage is really caused by climate change, and that's caused by oil and gas, and the earth is going to burn up because of what you all are wanting to maybe not directly do, but you are indirectly helping this horrendous industry that is destroying our planet survive by creating a new way to, be useful, if you will, by producing more water. So, I mean, it only makes common sense in their outlook, warped as it may be, that they should not help you and should actually be in direct opposition to your efforts. I mean, it makes sense, right?
Well, that is their line. Unfortunately, the only thing that line of thinking does is hurts New Mexicans, because the Permian Basin is a world-class oil basin, right? So there's investment there. The oil's being produced. I have no say as to whether or not the oil gets produced. Neither do you, neither does Matthias. Oil and gas producers are going to find a way to transport that water to other states. In fact, they're already doing so. Infrastructure is being built to take produced water to Texas today.
And other states are doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Other states are doing it. Texas has draft permits out to allow up to 500,000 barrels of treated produced water to be discharged into the Pecos River on the Texas side of the state line. And so regardless of how you feel about oil and gas development, we have a bunch of water at the surface today in New Mexico. And New Mexicans have 3 choices. We can throw it away, dispose of it. We can let it be shipped off to Texas or other states that want to use it, or we can decide whether or not we want to keep it in New Mexico and use it here.
Now, I would imagine that Pecos River flows down from New Mexico into Texas, so at least they're downstream, so it's not flowing the opposite direction. That would be a fun little irony if it was flowing. But I do know that elevation tends to be a little higher here in the Land of Enchantment than down in Texas, so that certainly is not likely. But so where do we go from here, and how can people just kind of engage with you all and this issue, including but not limited to this public comment period?
Yeah, and there are a variety of ways to ask questions and learn more. We have a website, the wateralliance.org. Again, that's WATR alliance.org. And there's information on our site related to this effort. There is also a lot of information on the Water Quality Control Commission docket, where all of the filings, the petition, and the rule all exist underneath the docket number, which is WQCC 2534. Additionally, as Jennifer mentioned, there is a meeting of the commission coming up on the 14th. And there was an opportunity to share some public comment. And additionally, we will, we're in the middle of an ongoing outreach campaign. So we will be having some additional outreach events, and we'll make those available. We've published those in newspapers, but we'll make them available on our website as well. And I'm speaking out of turn, but I just want to add one thing to what Jennifer said, which we can't say enough about this, which is we produce 7 million barrels of produced water a day. The infrastructure is in the ground to move most of that, 3 to 5 million of that today moves to Texas to be put down a disposal well. And we are experiencing seismicity on both sides of the border.
Okay.
But if we do nothing, Texas will take all of that water. They will treat it and they will put it to beneficial use in Texas. Just over the border, right? It'll be just over the border. And so the irony there and the real lunacy from the folks who are opposed to this is Texas has the resources to buy that water from us. If we don't want to use it, we can at least treat it and sell it to Texas. Right? We know how to, we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of even pursuing that route, these folks who are opposed to it are saying, just send it all to Texas because we don't want to mess with it.
And they're not fighting it in Texas. They're just fighting it here in New Mexico.
Well, you're talking West Texas, which is a whole different ball of
Yes.
wax. If this thing went through the heart of Austin, I think you might have a whole different discussion on your hands. But kind of continuing with the political aspect, who is the governor ultimately the decider on this? Is the legislature required as well? Obviously we're talking about this particular hearing, but this process, I know you obviously want it to be resolved quickly, but who can make that decision on this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in 2019, the legislature actually mandated the Water Quality Control Commission to issue regulations regarding the treatment, use, storage, disposal of treated produced water. So far, the Water Quality Control Commission hasn't issued those regulations. That's why we've got our rulemaking petition in front of them. The commission is made up of governor appointees. So there's at-large members, and then there are members that serve with different agencies throughout the state. The secretaries by statute are the designated members for those agencies. And then the secretaries can send a designee if they decide to send a designee. So it's a very large commission in total, but they all serve at the pleasure of the governor.
Okay, well then I guess we have to move into the final conversation, which is obviously you want this done yesterday, done as soon as possible. This governor has been relatively supportive. Any ideas on future potential governors? I presume that you've talked to Greg Hull, the Republican, and that most Republicans will be willing to hop on board with this. I'm going to just spitball here and say Deb Haaland's probably unlikely to jump on board with this kind of idea, but Bregman and Miyagishima may. So what are your actual conversations looking like with those folks?
So we're not going to second guess where New Mexicans fall on water resources. We have not yet spoken to the Holland campaign about where she falls on treated produced water. It is a very political issue. You tend to see more progressive Democrats fall on the side of keep everything in the ground related to hydrocarbons. But not all of them do. And with water, when you're talking about this much additional water for New Mexicans, that means more jobs, not just for scientists, not just for academic institutions, not just for water treatment facilities, but also for unions. You do see a mix of opinions that come into the conversation. And when you see the Rio Grande run dry, there are not too many areas where we can augment our water supply from. And so New Mexicans that care about water are really jumping into this issue, and they're looking for practical solutions. And those solutions have to be supported by science. They can't be supported by stunts and tactics. And eventually New Mexico is going to look at this situation. They're going to say, hey, we got kind of screwed with our water compacts. And then they're going to see 300,000 acre feet of water move into Texas, and they're going to say, man, did we miss it there? Why are we facing drought and water conservation restrictions and not getting the benefit of this water? We're transporting all our water out of the state. And I do think a lot of politicians are realizing that in Santa Fe.
So briefly, Bregman, Miyagishima, Hall, have you had conversation with them? Are you hoping that this whole thing is maybe resolved by the time the new governor would take office in January of 2026?
Yeah, we haven't had meaningful conversations with any of the campaigns about this particular issue. That being said, we in our original request to the commission, it was that this be set for a hearing in October. There was some conversation about holding a hearing in December of 2025. It's looking like it's going to be moved sometime into second, maybe third quarter of 2026. We're advocating aggressively that not be the case, but it's not a decision we get to make. It is a commission decision, and they've appointed a hearing officer who's trying to, find a schedule that works for this. At the end of the day, all this being said, this really shouldn't be a political issue, right? We're talking about water for the state of New Mexico. We think this should be, that the merits of this is really the science. And what do the folks at New Mexico State University, who are some of the leading minds on this in the world, what are they saying? The irony, related to that 2023 rulemaking is they didn't participate in it. So the folks who are doing the most advanced research did not participate in the forced rulemaking. So we can't say with a straight face that the 2023 rulemaking really was a state of the science inquiry. What we are trying to bring to the commission right now is a state of the science inquiry. We don't think that should be political. It should be, we want to leverage every water resource we can if science says we can, if the technology says we can. And so that's the argument that we've brought. We don't think it's a political one. These aggressive advocacy groups in Santa Fe are trying to turn this into a political issue. They don't want to talk about the merits. They just want to say we're opposed to anything oil and gas. We are not an oil and gas organization. We're a water organization. Folks can scoff at that all they want, but the Water Alliance is made up of water stakeholders from around the state, and we are trying to leverage water resources that we otherwise don't have.
All right. Well, Matthias and Jennifer, thank you very much for your time. And again, check out the Water Alliance's website, and feel free to, I encourage you to make a comment on this in this upcoming hearing. And thank you for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.